give over to Alexis.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I think I need to. Oh. Okay, can you see that, everyone?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, my name is Alexis Ibarra Ibarra. I come from Mexico. Currently, I'm studying my second master's. The first one, basically, I work with video games from a hermeneutic perspective. And right now, I'm preparing for becoming a video game art curator at the Erasmus Mundus Media Arts Cultures program. And today, I'm gonna talk to you about the magic of video game art curation, remediating video games to physical exhibitions. Here's a tiny structure of my presentation. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about video game aesthetics, then art curation, remediation, video game art curation. I'm going to give you some examples and then some final remarks. So first, video game aesthetics. Well, as most of you know, everything started with this idea of the core and shell, being core the mechanics and shell the representational sphere. They were intertwined and not separated. And it was also inside this cultural context, full of meaning. It also implied the context of the players, the context of the producers. But obviously we have developed more research and theory around video game aesthetics. But we eventually come to this idea that the whole aesthetics of a game, of a video game, precisely, is not only the representational sphere, but also this whole mechanics that give the video game this certain particularities in their materiality. So what I want to recover now from most contemporary theories around this is that video game aesthetics are the sensory phenomena that the player encounters in the video game that is visual, oral, haptic, and embodied. And that's really important because this is giving a lot of power to the player, because video games are actually unfinished art products or artworks in some cases. And it's not only until the player plays the game that it actually transforms into this finished product, even though there's a lot of possibilities inside the artwork. Also, it is. I also like this idea that it's where the hands, senses, bodies, and the tangible qualities of games meet. The aesthetic meaning of games emerges, because aesthetic is actually a meaning, and only through the player, through the public, this aesthetics can actually be a thing. So basically, in more daily life words, game aesthetics include the audiovisual, narrative, the mechanical aspects, the analog, that will be the devices we use to interact with the system, the digital, interactivity and performance of the player, and also this idea of immersion, flow, presence. There may be a whole other types of game aesthetics that should be here, of elements, but right now I'm working with those ones, just to give you an idea. So I want to go directly to immersion, flow, and presence. A lot of you have already talked about this, but as we have seen, the aesthetics of a video game is an entire and complex world. And this idea of immersion, flow, and presence is something that makes it even more complex. So immersion, flow, and presence are different concepts, but they overlap. So there is an entire debate on what's the actual difference between them. But I don't want to go into that. I just want to go into what they entail. Basically, when you play a video game, you go into this extreme experience of the world. You are completely focused, concentrated. You even lose the sense of self-reflection. You lose the track of time. There is this idea of authenticity, that is, you are fully committed to the game. And this idea of presence, of being in the world, but also of flow, where you actually feel like you are influencing that world. But all of that actually ignites something inside the player. And it's something that we have heard a lot of times. It's a metaphor that actually comes from Johann Wis. It's feel magic. It's this magic that we feel whenever we play a game. It's this childish wonder that is around video games. So what is art creation? The Latin from creation is curare, and it means to take care of. So you are actually taking care of a collection. It's not just displaying and exhibiting and producing those exhibitions. And it is actually authorial in the sense that the curator actually takes some decisions, and the curator has to be responsible for those. Basically, what the curator is doing is creating a narrative. And usually in the traditional sense, there is a structure that is usually the one that we see in museums, in big museums. So there is a flow, and we go interactive, contemplating certain artworks, and they have the labels. So it's all about this traditional experience that usually goes also into this timeline, or sometimes if they get a little bit more creative, it has to be about topics, but usually it's a timeline. And there are new ways of curation, which I think are better suited for video games and for new media in general. This I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in the next slide. But the idea behind the new approaches is to develop critical meaning. It's to actually create a debate, to actually interact with the public, with the artist, with the artwork, the institution. So you actually just create this framework so that can happen. And contemporary art creation is basically you select the works, you direct and display the displaying and exhibition of the artworks. You have to work with the labels and publications, preservation. So basically this is traditional curation. But in preservation, there's a problem when we are starting to talk about video games, because usually what we are trying to preserve are objects, and that's kind of easy because your regular temperature or other things. But for video games, they are hardware and software, and there's also obsolescence of technology. They are not really, like, for example, consoles can be quite fragile, but at the same time, if the public cannot play the game, it is not actually preserved. So that is a problem, because you are actually contributed to the deterioration of video games. You are also an interface between the artist, the institution, and audience. You are trying to include people into the museum, into the gallery, into the exhibition. You have to include the digital world as well. There is this whole topic about formal and informal documentation that has to do a lot with meaning and understanding the interpretations of the public, and you're basically creating a narrative. So remediation, in short, it's converting one medium into another. So the idea here is that video games are, yes, they have an analog component, but they are also digital. So how do you bring the digital and the analog together to a physical exhibition? How do you translate the haptics? How do you translate the oral, the embodiment, for example? How do you create this experience and recreate that experience? How do you enact it and reenact it? So those are the questions that I'm trying to answer. I know that there is not going to be an answer, but that's like a guideline. So the idea here is also taking the idea of the participatory museum, particularly because video games are also interactive and they have this idea of immersion and flow and presence. So the idea is that the public can be active, they can influence the exhibition, they can take part of decision making, they can co-create, and they can also they also have any space to create themselves. So there is no formula. You can dedicate an entire exhibition for one video game or several. There are a number of strategies. You can go from traditional approaches like the one you're seeing right now, that it's basically exhibiting drawings and designs, the graphics, for example. But there are other approaches that are newer, that are installations, new media museums, digital museums, and also the incorporation of augmented reality and virtual reality. Something that is really interesting is that a lot of exhibitions use this symbolic elements like the coin, like the arcade. So they are truly trying to evoke that feeling of actually participating in the video game world. The whole idea here is to create an experience. So basically, for example, we have the exhibition of the Smithsonian in 2012. As you can see, it's new media, design, and interactivity. They decided to go with this strategy, and it worked pretty well. And for example, there are artists that are taking video games and they are transforming them to actually produce a new artwork that is also really interesting, and that could actually form part of exhibitions too. We have, for example, I don't think you can see it, but it's Game Masters, the exhibition. And as you can see, it has to do a lot with interactivity. The public can actually play the games, but it also has to be about design, about creating an environment, creating a whole experience. Here, for example, again, it's about design, about creating this environment. This idea of the cyber future is also present in a lot of exhibitions. Because it also matches with this idea of video games. There's interactivity, like the new approach is to be interactive. We also meet these things, for example, panoramas that comes from the 18th century that gives that feeling of immersion. But it's really interesting that it's something that comes from the 18th century, but now it's used for creating immersion with the help of also the digital. Again, creating environments. Here you can see also the arcade as a symbol of this. This one is a V&A exhibition. And here, for example, in the Computerspiele Museum, they are trying to recreate the idea of the living room, of the time of the video game. So it's basically this idea of not only recreating the feeling of the game, but actually recreating the feeling of when people was playing that game. Also, VR is everywhere. Almost in every exhibition, there is a VR experience. So it's really important. We also have these ideas like the gamification strategies. For example, in this exhibition, this happened in Spain. You had a coin and you were answering questions in all the exhibition. And finally, you were creating an avatar in the end and returning the coin. So like incorporating that kind of mechanics is also important. And for example, we had this, that is a complete world remediation to a physical space. And a lot of people, me included, felt like really, really happy. And we experienced that childish wonder I'm talking about. The thing here is that I do consider that this itself, even though it's an amusement park, it's an artwork because it's a big installation. But obviously this is basically an entertainment space. So this is one of the hardest challenges of creating video games, because video games are part entertainment, are also part philosophical, but you also have to mix this together, and sometimes that can cause a little bit of trouble in the art world. So what do we need? We need to create that kind of experience, that kind of wonder, but without leaving behind this intellectual discourse, this idea of creating debates, discuss with the artists, with the artworks, with the video games, with the public, the players. And again, this is not a new idea. This comes from thematic and amusement parks. So it's like transforming things that already existed to actually create an experience for video game. So finally, well, this is basically a tiny bit of video game art creation. There are all the new strategies. They're equally important, and they are like you can use both. But in my practice, I would try to go for new strategies. There is no formula, and we are still facing some problems. That it's basically copyrights, the obsolescence of technology because of the way the market works with this idea of innovation, perpetual innovation capitalism, and well, financing. But as you could see, like there is not really a problem with financing, because basically all of these exhibitions were big productions. The whole point of this is to create an experience, to ignite something, because probably the public is not going to remember every single object in the exhibition, but they will remember what you created in them. They will remember if that experience actually reminded them of the experience they happen to have when they play the game, or just experience it for the first time. So basically the curator is not only an author, it's not only an artist, but the work of the curator is also to create magic. That's it. Thank you, and hope you liked it. Here's my contact, and I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Something.
Thank you so much. A great presentation. I especially liked this idea of exhibitions as a meaning creation framework, which kind of hints at this idea that art curation is a little like game design, but in a very specific way, because in the same way that a game designer must take care that to kind of abstract the core system, they are kind of modeling without forgetting to also make it entertaining. What you are showing is how art curation needs to do the same thing, but still kind of acknowledge the